Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologue. I'd like to encourage you to visit Guns Etc. They're strong supporters of our president and the principles our country was founded upon. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and is a firearm lover's paradise. And for all your online firearms needs, just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to our channel, 960 The Patriot. Welcome back, February 26, 2020. If I had a piece of property to sell you, and I told you it was a great buy, the most gorgeous sunrise you've ever seen, I might pique your interest initially. But then say I didn't tell you that the land was full of sludge, the pipes all over the town leak sewage, the air smells of it, and the people who live there now do everything they can to leave. You'd call me a huckster, wouldn't you? Or a liar. What if you discovered all those things on your own after visiting or reading more about that property and asked me about that property after you looked it up? And I said, okay, but look, it's not wrong to promote the beautiful sunrises there, is it? I give you the Bernie Sanders defense of his foreign policy ideas and economic policies. Pete Buttigieg had the line of the evening last night when he said, I just don't think it's a very good idea for our party to be telling people to look at the bright side of the Castro regime. This is exactly what Bernie Sanders has been doing since Sunday. He did it on 60 Minutes. Then he did it again on cable news interviews Monday and, of course, Tuesday last night. And in the middle of it all, he had good words for China's economic prowess at reducing economic inequality. Last night, asked about his Cuban comments, he said, quote, Cuba made progress on education. You telling me literacy is bad? Close quote. It really makes one stretch to find the words here, but let me try, because at the end of the debate, Bernie Sanders said this biggest misconception about him was that, and I quote, is that the ideas I'm talking about are radical. They're not. In one form or another, they exist in countries all over the world, close quote. In one form or another. Yes, there's the rub, in one form or another. We'll come back to that. But it's hard to say your ideas are not radical when in every speech you call for a revolution, which he does. You know, if you know your history, Fidel Castro hoodwinked a few Americans in 1958 and 1959 as well, for about 5 minutes. But let me tell you a little truth about Castro that Bernie Sanders elides. All of Castro's early promises had been broken. There had been no free elections, and there were none so long as Castro was in power. All political parties, with the exception of the Communist Party, were destroyed. All political dissenters were executed, imprisoned, or exiled when he came to power. All academic freedom was eliminated. All major newspapers and radio stations were seized, and all of Cuba was put in the iron grip of a communist-oriented police state. Castro's ambitions extended far beyond his own shores. He transformed the island of Cuba into a hostile and militant communist satellite, a base from which to carry communist infiltration and subversion throughout the Americas. With guidance, support, and arms from Moscow and Beijing, he made an anti-Americanism a sign of loyalty, and anti-communism a punishable crime. He confiscated over $1 billion worth of American property, threatened the existence of naval bases at Guantanamo, and rattled red rockets at the United States, which can hardly close its eyes to a potential enemy missile or submarine base only 90 miles from its shores. I didn't tell you that that was a quote. All one big quote from a speech given by John F. Kennedy. When someone tells you this Democratic Party would be unrecognizable to your parents' Democratic Party, that's a pretty good example. If someone tells you John Kennedy would never understand this Democratic Party, it's a pretty good example. Yes, of course, you can have good literacy in a tyranny like Cuba, or for that matter, like the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. When you enforce truancy laws with the threat of prison, and the curriculum is fully defined and uniformed by the state, and you ban any alternative education from home to religious instruction so as to maintain the doctrinaire regime built on propaganda, you can get literacy rates pretty high. In some form or another, indeed. But Note the most important thing here. Why does Bernie Sanders look for exceptions to defend places like China and Cuba and never say a single word of praise about America? What kind of odd standard or morality is that? I'll put it squarely. He has far more kind words to say about places like Cuba and China than he ever does the United States. This is not a small point. For tyrannies, he looks for the exceptions of decency. For America or allies like Israel, he looks to and speaks only for the exceptions of failure. Think about that in trying to understand the models he uses. Truly, think on that for a moment. There are two families you're trying to place a foster kid with. One is upstanding, middle class, has a couple of other kids, a Chevrolet, not a great credit rating, perhaps because they're extended a bit on credit cards and they put their kids through parochial schools. It's a stretch, but they do it. The father has been laid off from his trade job from time to time, but he's usually employed. Then there's another family, lives in a fancy and gated community. The kids are dressed in the nicest of clothes. The mom and dad drive Corvettes and Cadillacs and have 800 credit scores. The kids go to private secular school, but the breadwinner, the father, he's the head of a drug cartel, and high-end drug dealers visit the house often. Some of the kids have used some of the cocaine brought to the dad for his testing. Indeed, have spent time in rehab centers because some of them became addicted. And as these things go, of course, the dad has ordered the killing of a lot of his rivals and informers. Do you say what a great family because they want for nothing? That's where the foster kid should go? Or do you go to the first family, the imperfect but decent family, and praise that family to the highest of heavens if you're the social worker trying to find a home for that foster child? Bernie's career has been to praise the second family and denounce the first. But there's an additional problem. Bernie simply isn't telling the truth about these in some form or another countries. Of Cuba, we've said enough, I think. As for his praise of China's economic policies, its policies in reducing income inequality, come on, Bernie. Go to the left wing's usual source for these things. Let's try Amnesty International. Can we agree on Amnesty International as a source, Bernie? Here's their opening paragraph on China. I quote directly. Quote, Amnesty International has documented widespread human rights violations in China. The government continues to draft and enact new laws under the guise of national security that present serious threats to human rights. Nobel Peace Prize laureate Liu Xiaobao died in custody. Activists and human rights defenders are detained, prosecuted, and sentenced on the basis of vague and overbroad charges, such as subverting state power and picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Police detain human rights defenders outside formal detention facilities, sometimes incommunicado, for long periods, which posed additional risk of torture and other ill treatment for detainees. Controls on the internet are strengthened. Repression of religious activities outside state-sanctioned churches increased. Repression conducted under anti-separatism or counterterrorism campaigns remained particularly severe in Xinjiang Uyghur region and Tibetan-populated areas. Freedom of expression in Hong Kong is under attack as the government uses vague and overbroad charges to prosecute pro-democracy activists, close quote, in some form or other. Ah, but it's Denmark, you say. Well then, stop trying to, in Pete Buttigieg's words, show us the bright sides of the Castros and the Maoists. But let's do talk Denmark for a moment. Population 5.5 million, 88% white, 75% evangelical Lutheran. Allow me to quote the Danish Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who left office just last year. He responded to Bernie Sanders last year. He felt compelled to, what with Bernie continually invoking Denmark's socialism. He said, quote, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy, close quote. Just 2 years ago, Denmark also did the opposite of what Bernie Sanders says. According to Bloomberg News, not the candidate, the news source, perhaps the candidate ought to read his own dispatches, quote, Denmark's government proposed a broad range of tax cuts that will hit all income groups and make it cheaper to save toward retirement and reduce levies on cars, close quote. The government also pledged to monitor the country's corporate tax rate to make sure it remained competitive with other nations' corporate tax rates. As for Denmark's free stuff, the one form or another, sure, there's some of that at a price no American could afford. They've got a 60% tax rate, and on top of that, everyone pays a 25% tax on everything they buy. The cost of living is sky high. Want a car in Denmark? Add 180% tax to the price tag. These stats from Investors Business Daily, quoting CNN. Perhaps this is why Bernie could say last time he ran for president, quote, "You don't necessarily need a choice of 23 underarm spray deodorants or of 18 pairs of sneakers when children are hungry in this country," close quote. He hates choice. He hates giving people choice. He hates companies that employ people. He lies about the countries he praises, and he lies about the countries he wants to revolutionize, all while telling us his ideas are actually not all that radical. No, they are not if you state them in, say, Cuba. You know what you cannot do in Cuba? If you are gay and have pride in that, you can't do that. Yes, last year Cuba canceled its gay rights parade and arrested hundreds of gay rights marchers and protesters who decided to march for their rights, even though the country canceled it. You know where else you can't do that? The West Bank or Gaza under Palestinian control, because they don't allow gay rights meetings or even gays to exist. But Bernie says Israel is the bigoted and racist country. Israel with the biggest gay rights parade, perhaps, in the entire Middle East. Look at what he praises. Look at what he despises. And add John Kennedy and all he stood for in that latter category. I give you today's Democratic Party. I don't think it'll be around much longer. Then again, worth asking, why is Bernie never once affiliated with that party or registered with it? Turns out there's a lot he wants to destroy. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.